Hey, so before we jump in, I've noticed some of the critical and communal response to South of Midnight, and just gotta say this. Overall, South of Midnight is pretty good. And while the gameplay isn't Dark Souls level, we're changing the game with this, it's definitely serviceable. But the art, the story, the music, the characters, and the vibes are immaculate. For a game that you can get for $15 by paying a Game Pass sub, you're getting more than your money's worth. Just thought I'd get that out of the way at the top. If you're still interested in seeing my full thoughts, stick around. Hey everyone, it's Mo. And this week we're looking at a game that does things a little different. I know I said that a lot in my videos, but I mean it this time. Because we're going to be talking about my time with South of Midnight by Compulsion Games, of Contrast and We Happy Few fame. This one has been on my radar for a while between its setting, the American Deep South, not being highlighted or featured prominently in games almost ever, its gorgeous art style that makes it look like a playable Leica film at times, and other things that I'll get into. But before I do, I just gotta say this. South of Midnight is one of those games that I think you should go into fresh. If you can get a month of Game Pass, do it, play through the game, and come back. And if you're still watching, this is your final spoiler warning. With that out of the way, you know the drill. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and all that good stuff. And let's get this show on the road. South of Midnight takes place in the unspecified county of Prospero in the American Deep South. You follow Hazel Flood, a young woman who, while in the midst of checking on neighbors, preparing for an impending hurricane, and getting into an argument with her mother, has her house get washed away in said hurricane, with her mother still inside it. After trying and failing to get to it, she finds out that she has the powers of a weaver, individuals that can see the threads that make up reality, and repair any damages to them in the grand tapestry. The setting and narrative of South of Midnight throws a lot at you, with a lot of proper nouns and verbs. But between them being used when necessary to explain how things work, and the journal explaining things neatly and concisely, it never gets overwhelming. It's one of the things I like the most about the writing in South of Midnight. Everyone sounds like how they talk in that part of the world. Granted, a lot of this could beat my general ignorance about how the American South is like, but I like a lot of the dialogue that's being spoken. And this also ties into the themes and how Southern folklore is tied into it. It's good that Compulsion did a lot of research to make sure they got what they needed to get right. My favorite example has to be the terrain markers for the platforming. Instead of the weirdly maligned yellow paint, it's all marked in blue. This is because of the connection that the color Haint Blue has with warding off evil creatures when used to paint a home's front porch. And that is such an amazing blink and you'll miss it detail, and South of Midnight is full of stuff like that. Another aspect I'm loving so far are the characters and the stories that they're used to tell. Hazel is a great protagonist, because while she's initially skeptical of all this stuff, she very quickly goes, okay, constantly questioning it is not going to get me anywhere, let's roll with it. You can see how a lot of the weaving and grand tapestry is also tied into her family's history, and to get any further into that would be spoiler territory. There are other characters, like this neat big old catfish that serves as both your main narrator and exposition fairy for the proceedings. But it isn't all sunshine and rainbows. South of Midnight deals with some pretty heavy topics relating to trauma and how its after effects can linger and manifest, both figuratively and literally. There's an entire section early on that has you following the ghosts of a previous weaver as she uses her powers to escort escaped slaves through the Underground Railroad. An entire chapter is set in an abandoned company town. You see through the subject of the collectible notes just how shitty it was there. Hell, there's even an entire section of the early story that deals with a pair of brothers in a tough situation, the culmination of which caused me to legitimately almost cry my fucking eyes out. Because Benji deserves better, damn it. Sorry, I need to move on, that shit still stings. You can see the hurt from all these past events just coalescing into very real and very tangible dangers in the world, and it goes a long way to show that South of Midnight also incorporates them into the bulk of its gameplay as well.
Angry clouds roll on the far horizon, sick green sky and tornadoes flying. How much longer until the river's rising? Birds fall silent and the critters are hiding, when mucky swamps and dusty lands colliding.
South of Midnight, as a video game that you play, is an action platformer where the majority of your time is spent getting from point A to point B and fighting things that get in your way. The beginning 2 chapters do a really good job of introducing the basic platforming by way of guided tutorial that slowly, but surely, adds more of the basic mechanics. You run, you jump, and climb as the obvious stuff. Once you get your hands on Hazel's Weaver powers is when things really begin to open up. You start with getting a guided line that manifests as the threads of reality guiding Hazel on her path, complete with the whispers of her name. This kind of player guiding has been a thing since the original Dead Space, so I'm glad to see it pop up in more stuff. After that, you get the ability to weave objects into existence to make platforms, a double jump, a dash of the regular and air variety, a wall run, a push, a pull, and the ability to animate Hazel's stuffed toy crouton to get into spaces that she can't. It's a nice spread of abilities that do what they need to in a pinch. The thing I like about them is that they're not only thematically consistent with the rest of the game, but also layer on top of each other to make some very hectic platforming challenges. The standouts have to be these, where you are outrunning a giant living shadow thing after working on enough of the localized terrors of the Grand Tapestry to fix them. They make for great set pieces. These tools also fit into combat as well. Using a pair of weaving hooks, Hazel can use the aforementioned weave to stun, pull enemies to reel them in, push them and enemy projectiles back, and summon crouton to possess enemies. Being on sizable cooldowns, you gotta make use of them when a situation calls for it because you'll get wrecked if you have no abilities available. And speaking of enemies, you spend your time fighting off the Haints, evil spirits made of stigma that are tied to the damages to the Great Tapestry. You fight a few different varieties of them, but after a while you run into all the possible combinations of Haints and you just get into a group of fighting Haints, unraveling them to get health back, and then proceeding to move on to the more interesting narrative and platforming. Normally, this would annoy me, but combat is fine enough for the regular enemies, but it really picks up in the few boss fights in South of Midnight, which, honestly, you need to see for yourself. And while the mechanics of South of Midnight's gameplay are serviceable, that's all they are. Serviceable. But they're in service to the other elements on display, and for that express purpose, they do what is needed. And their attempts to weave their narrative into the mechanics of play are pretty decent, all things considered. But there's also one more thing about South of Midnight that I want to talk about before we go. Now, those last things I want to talk about are the ways that South of Midnight looks and sounds, because god damn, does Compulsion knock it out of the fucking park. Everything about the way Prospero County looks is amazing, like something out of an old Southern Gothic storybook. There's overgrown forests, flooded farmlands, decayed and abandoned factories, and even a stint in a graveyard at the beginning of the game. But it never overshadows that there's a distinct colorfulness to the entire thing. Plus, I also gotta shout out how all of the characters look like stop-motion animation models in cutscenes in a very complimentary way, with them looking like they were animated on 2s and everything. I don't know what kind of magic they worked in Unreal Engine 4, but if anyone can explain it to me in the comments, please do so, because that would be appreciated. And the music. God damn, the music. I had to check out the composer who did it, and it was one Olivier Devier. He's done a lot of stuff in games, but some of the bigger ones include Remember Me, the Freedom Cry expansion for Assassin's Creed 4 Black Flag, Dying Light 2, both Plague Tale games, and was one of the composers to Streets of Rage 4. Dude is gifted with the swouse, as the Russian Badger says. The tunes tell the big story beats, and one of those songs was instrumental to making me cry. I'm not gonna share the more character-specific ones like the boss themes, because those are something you need to hear for yourself, so trust me. The music has been stuck in my head all week. It's that good. South of Midnight, while a mechanically serviceable action game, tells a story of trauma and its recovery, and it does so admirably. And does so while highlighting and representing a part of the world and culture that doesn't really get that much play in video games all that often, and I gotta respect it for it. It is hands down one of my favorite games of 2025 because of the strength of its story, music, and visuals, and how those and the gameplay come together to form a complete package. Go out of your way to check this one out. You won't be disappointed.